First of all, welcome to the show, Catherine Liu. Thanks for coming on. First of all,
Hey,
thank you for writing this book. This book has you eloquently articulate everything I've felt in my bones since Barack Obama got elected, and maybe even before that. I knew that Bill Clinton was no friend of the working class, and I also read a book. This book will radicalize you if you read it, just like when I read Thomas Frank's Listen Liberal. Now, most of my friends, my old friends in Hollywood, don't talk to me anymore because they didn't read that book. And
any book,
and so they're what you would call a virtue signaler. They vote for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and they pat themselves on the back for being against fascism. I'm not kidding. That's what they think, and they think anybody who critiques the Democratic Party or the professional managerial class is a traitor and a grifter and doing it for money. So I just want to read a couple of quotes. First of all, could you define, what do you call the professional managerial class?
Well, okay, these are credentialed elites. These are people who don't just have money, they have resources and they have degrees. They have, they're affiliated with professional organizations like doctors, like lawyers, have the ABA. We have professional organizations, and they're supposed to be a class of people with expertise who are supposed to be neutral about political issues, but sort of mediating between working class people and, the bosses, the capitalists. And they've been since 1900, sort of on the ascendancy in the US as capitalism becomes more and more complex. You need people to manage all sorts of things from finance to health. And today they make up about 25% of the workforce, but the top layer of this class really hoards resources, networks, everything else. They're in Hollywood, they're in the government, and they really believe themselves to be on the side of progress. I think they're the biggest obstacles to any political or economic transformation that we can envision in the United States, because they basically like the status quo.
Exactly.
They use words like empower people because they always are actors. Other people are passive, and they're always like in NGOs asking you for money. I just got a whole bunch at the end of the year. I'm sure we all do solicitations for contributions. They're like, we're empowering these people. We're empowering these people, and it's always them acting. They're terrified of actually mass politics and working class power.
So let me just read a couple of quotes from your book, and because they're very eye-opening. To defeat reactionary politics masquerading as populism. Now, I would consider that, like when I watch Sean Hannity, and a lot of what happens on Fox News is they pretend to care about the working man, and they could pretend they're pretending to be populist. So to defeat reactionary politics masquerading as populism, we need anti-professional managerial class struggle from the left, not more identity politics, which has become just another vehicle of the professional managerial class of virtue signaling, which is what I tried to impart to Cornel West when he came on my show, and he doesn't want to hear any of it. I'll play that clip in a minute. In liberal circles, talking about class or class consciousness before other forms of difference is not just controversial, it's heretical. They call you a class reductionist. I've been called a class reductionist.
Stupid,
If you argue that race, gender, and class are not interchangeable categories, they pile on with the legalistic and deadly term intersectional to accommodate the materialistic critique of their politics. The professional managerial class simply does not want its class identity or interests unmasks. I do not opine on the professional managerial class because I hope to have a civil discussion about our differences. I'm writing this critique to isolate the professional managerial class's historically grounded virtue hoarding politics of liberal refusal to adopt and support the social and political changes that we desperately need. The dark social consequences of its monopoly on expertise, in addition to its attempts to monopolize public virtue while blocking any attempts at meaningful economic redistribution, has given shape to our present political situation. So let me bring you back in. That's so well said. they always it could have easily been called virtue signalers, because that's what they do. They concentrate and put all their focus on virtue signaling, and they put and anything to materially help workers. So like I've heard someone talk about the left in the United States is made up of the professional managerial class. They're not actually connected to workers and blue collar people like the left is in Europe and other places. That's why they have strikes all the time. And here in America, strikes are, look, that's bad. It's so close to Christmas. Why would the railroad, why would they go on? That's what the news media says, and that's what the prevention. So let me just bring you in, and you could go ahead and comment on any part of that you'd like.
Well, so one of the things that's happened with its form of anti-racism, which we should all be against, is that it's become part of a managerial system of like training employees to speak in a certain way to be acceptable in liberal circles. And all of the things that they say they want, which is social justice, is blocked by this attempt to groom the way we actually relate to each other in a social way. And so it costs the bosses and the capitalists no money to change language all the time, to keep us unmoored, to take away our connection to ordinary people. I hate to say this, but I just want to say ordinary people. Ordinary people are rejecting this kind of politics, or they don't even, or it just demobilizes them. And so it's a great way for the PMC, which votes, to make people not want to vote, actually, because when you see the sort of florid linguistic changes they're always making about progress, what it actually blocks is what we need, which is single-payer health care. We desperately, desperately need that in this country. We need social and public housing. We need better care for children and for mothers, working mothers especially. But none of the PMC, like phalanxes that take care of these things, they can't focus on these what I could like to call bread and butter issues. Like you try to focus them on bread and butter issues, and suddenly they're like off on like planet Mars, talking about like their radical vanguardist thing. And so one thing I like to think about this, like within academia now, is that they're like the cool kids. They're always trying to find the edgiest way of being radical in language, but not have to actually transform the relationships of power. So what anti-racism has given us in the liberal professions, the media, academia, where we live, is new human resources protocols to control and surveil workers. So why is the African-American vote, the Latino vote, leaving the Democratic Party? Because people know that this liberal progressive party allegedly is not on their side. And out of desperation, they move to a guy who has this like rough, completely, ridiculous style, Donald Trump, who seems uncensored, unfiltered. And they're like, at least I can get some emotional catharsis because I've got these people like talking down to me. And I wanted to say, I use the word hoarding because that's what rich people do. They hoard resources, they hoard money, and the professional managerial class says, they're above money, but they're very comfortable, and they hoard symbolic capital. They hoard things that
crypto. It's like a form of crypto. Your virtue is like a cryptocurrency for them.
Yes, it is like a form of crypto. And like in the old days, the virtue used to be like a way of controlling the self, right? So that is about, speaking the truth, being sexually and aggressively like in self-control. And so they're just like, we are the people who can really know how to control ourselves, control conversations. And anyone who doesn't speak in this style or ascribe to what we think is the good, we think should be left behind. We think are, in Hillary Clinton's words, the deplorables. I mean, I can't believe that lady still has a platform, but she does. I literally cannot understand why people still listen to her about anything. But she does have this like Protestant, grim, Methodist, like virtuous way of being. And it's part of me is like, America's never really gotten over our old Puritanism. They're like the, you know, I don't know, they're like these new Puritans too. And in the meantime, the country is dying. Like if you go into the Rust Belt, the industrial, well, I just saw the economic numbers today. We're growing 5.5%, but young people don't have any hope. And there's no, unless you play this like really ideologically stringent game and go to college, or you just like hustle your ass for the rest of your lives. Like working class young people just don't feel like they have any hope. You know what the median house cost is in Southern California where I live? $881,000. That's the median. That's like your average, ordinary, you know, not so great, not so bad house. And so, I don't know. I think people should be angry. I think people should be really outraged. I think we should be talking to worker discontent. And the other thing that virtue hoarding does is it takes away dignity from people who are not college educated.
So,
because you're always like, oh, did I see the wrong thing? Oh, shoot, I didn't put the recycling in the right bag. You know, it's like they're all like about this kind of control of the other through consumption and individual acts.
And so what, like, but what the professional managerial class and the what they are in service of the establishment. And what has been the greatest gift to them is Donald Trump, in a sense that they can demonize him as the whipping boy. He's the worst thing of everything. He's racist. He's fascist. So you have to go and vote for more of this stuff that gave rise to Donald Trump. So what I've always said is I'm not angry at Donald Trump. I'm angry at the system that made people desperate enough to vote for a game show host billionaire who didn't even want to be president in the first place. And so we're not angry at that system so they can keep people distracted when they think they're fighting fascism. What they're really doing is they're being manipulated by the real fascists, which is the establishment, to get them to focus on Donald Trump instead of focus on the symptom or the system that made people desperate enough to vote for Donald Trump. And that's what I tried to impart to Cornel West when he was on my show, and he wouldn't have any of it. He just kept referring to Donald Trump as a fascist and fighting white supremacy. Now, let's remember, Cornel West grew up wealthy, and he spent his entire life in ivory tower, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. He's not a member of the working class. He never was. And I am. I've been blue collar my entire life. I was a bricklayer. I did tuck pointing. And then I became a stand-up comedian, which is the most blue-collar thing you could do, entertaining drunks in nightclubs and banging my head and sleeping in condos and banging my head against the blue-collar wall for 30 years, right? He didn't do any of that, which is why he gets to then talk about identity politics ad nauseum. And go ahead, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's really important to this is what I make the point about in the book, too, is that working class people use their bodies to work. That's how they earn their living.
That's right.
They like drain themselves or whatever. I'm descended of long generations of peasants. My uncle, I'm in China right now, was a blue-collar worker his whole life, retired, a factory worker, never made more than a factory worker's wage. And, you know, I've worked every bad job. Can I say shitty on your show?
Sure.
Yeah, I've worked every shitty job in the world that women are allowed to work. And so when you have this experience, like, of sort of how, when you're working these jobs or you're using up your body and your energy and you look at how people look at you, you understand, like, how low you are on the social totem pole. And the professional manager class are the brain workers. They're the knowledge workers. They're like in the information economy. So many things in the world still need physical labor to be done, like longshoremen. We want to automate everything because basically we don't want to have unruly workers. They would automate bricklaying if they could, Jimmy, so that there wouldn't be a person like you. You know what I mean? They would have robots do that, and then you'd have like unemployed, opioid addicted people who were once working class and who are just unemployed. But these knowledge workers, people who only like use their minds for a living, they really think that being smarter makes them better than everyone else. And I'm just like, no, it does not. And your smarts is a very like narrow form of smarts. Like, you know, I don't know how to solve this problem. I just feel like we have to
identify it
be
first.
Combative.
Yes, so I'm going to be combative with Cornel West right here,
Okay.
and so this all comes down. By the way, so all this trans issues and gender identity and all that is not coming from the grassroots. That is not coming from the bottom up. That is coming from the top down. That is coming from BlackRock. That is coming from Vanguard. That is called DEI and the diversity. Equity and inclusion. And what is that? What's that there to do? That's there to put a shield of virtue around the companies that are raping the planet and crushing workers. So they can say, look, we've got gay people, we've got trans people crushing workers.
It helps pharmaceuticals too.
We've got we've got black people and brown people, and we've got women. We've got all these people doing all the horrible things, but they're now getting a good salary for doing it. And doesn't that make us virtuous? And Cornel West could not stop using that language, could not stop talking about trans issues, could not stop talking about gender, white supremacy, calling his political opponents fascists, which comes right from BlackRock and Vanguard and the Democratic elite establishment, the billionaire class that runs the whole world. And here I am trying to impress upon him, and I'd like to get your reaction to it. So let me just say this. So the point of running a third-party campaign is to offer an alternative to the two major parties, to bring together disaffected members of those parties, along with independents and others who feel alienated from the political system as it exists. And the best way to do this is by running on economic issues that unite us, but which neither major party is willing to address because they're both beholden to the same powerful corporate interest. The Democratic Party long ago abandoned the working class in favor of beating the drum on cultural issues, and now that's all the Democrats have to run on. So if voters are looking for a party running on trans rights and calling Donald Trump and his supporters white supremacists, they can already vote for Democrats. The role of a third party is to focus not on the identity politics that divide us, but on core economic issues that unite us along class lines, like Christian Smalls did at Staten Island. Do you think he led with LGBTQ trans rights and white supremacy, or do you think he organized along class lines? That's what we have to do. You have to organize, meet people where they are. So what is your plan to organize along class lines, or are you going to keep talking about white supremacy and all those identity politics, which are there, not from the ground up, from the top down, to make sure we stay divided? What is your plan to organize along class lines?
Well, I appreciate again the clarity and candor of what you have to say. We have profound disagreements, brother. When I organize around white supremacy, I'm not making some utilitarian calculation. I'm speaking as a black man who comes out of a tradition that's been terrorized and traumatized by white elites. And that does not in any way mean it takes me away from class issues. Class issues are crucial. Class issues are fundamental. But it doesn't mean that I'm putting up with white supremacy. One of the problems is that you get too many folk who want to talk class, and can't say a mumbling word about white supremacy, police brutality. Can't say a mumbling word hardly. Or when they do.
So that was basically his response. And it was super disappointing. And even when I tried to point out to him, he didn't care about what happened to people during COVID and lockdowns and how it was a controlled demolition of our economy that benefited a handful of millionaires and billionaires and crushed everybody else. And I tried to point that out to him because he didn't care about COVID. He didn't care about that. He didn't care that 70,000 workers got fired in one state alone. Healthcare workers got fired in one state alone because they wouldn't go along with a mandate from Big Pharma to enrich them. And here's what he said. Here's why we did. Black business owners collapsed by 41%. Black business because of lockdowns. Do you care yet?
Well, no,
70,000 workers in one state were fired because of vaccine mandates. When are you going to care? Do they all have to be trans? When are you going to care about these workers? When are you going to care about this? What are you going to care about this? So anyway, I would just like to get your response to that. It was a very frustrating interview for me because I thought if there was ever a time for a third party candidate to make a headway in this country, it's now. And he's on purpose throwing it away by incorporating the professional managerial class language and lexicon into his campaign, which is there to divide people and keep us from coming together along class lines. And luckily I'm not as dumb as a Harvard professor that I could see through that. Too bad he's not. What do you have to say?
Well, you know what? I think that, what I long for is someone who will speak to, universal issues of human dignity and actually crunch the numbers. You know, if there are 25% of people who have college degrees, and of those 25, like half, like maybe 13% are part of the PMC elites, then you have the majority of Americans who don't go to college, who are going to work non-professional jobs, and whose lives are really fucked up by not just by capitalism, by this, what I would call liberal authoritarianism. And the things that they face every day is economic stress. And white supremacy as a kind of monolith is part of racism, maybe, but I think like the person who's like working 90 hours a week to support their family, who's Latina, who's Black, who's white, is facing like economic exploitation. And here's the other thing that I'm really disappointed about, and I'm just going to be super empirical about this. The largest number of poor people in America are white. How do you explain that?
Supreme.
If white supremacy like gives white people this get out of jail free card, why are the largest numbers of poor people in America white? What's wrong with them? Like, can't they just go and say like, I'm white, like give me something? No, because it's class that actually divides us, and it divides us universally. It's economics that exploits us and exploits us universally. And that is something that I guess Cornel West has funders or something that he doesn't want to talk about. What I'm really disappointed by, and what I think is, really, the thing about the Dems and the Libs is that they love niche politics. They think the people are going to follow them. They think the people are held hostage to them and their little niche politics. And that's why they have to like beat the drum about the Republicans or Donald Trump being a fascist. Well, fascism is like the unity of political, economic, and military power, right? And so I don't know that we're completely there yet. We might be, but what we definitely have is a kind of liberal authoritarianism that brooks no dissent. So I'm like scared of saying certain things, but I'm also old and I've also got tenure. I mean, I could be demonized just for coming on your show. I don't really give a shit anymore. But what happens is like, you can't have a disagreement with people today. And that is not liberal. That's authoritarian. Because if you say like, I disagree with you on that point, and you'll come back to me and say, you're a bad person and you belong in like PMC jail, like that's actually not liberal. And we can't even have proper disagreements these days. Everything is veiled through this like morality play, and somehow repeating certain mantras like white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy is supposed to make us feel good about who we are. You know what it is? Capitalism does not discriminate. It exploits you no matter who you are. And speaking of BlackRock, one of the things that happened right before the lockdown was that BlackRock was actually sanctioned by the UN High Commission on Human Rights for buying up social housing in beaten down areas of Sweden, Romania, all over the world, renovating it and then pumping up the rent like 3 times. The same things they've been doing in the United States that has produced all this homelessness is they're trying it now in other countries in the world. But after 2020 lockdown, we just ignored any of that stuff and we just went forward. Like, we need to have citizen vigilance about what is happening with private equity, with these giant hedge funds. They have way too much money, and politicians have let that happen. So if someone's not talking about that, but is just talking about white supremacy, then I just don't think we're ever going to get to a more economically just society.
I couldn't.
With their leadership.
So as Kurt makes the point on the show, class is not downstream from your gender. It's not downstream from your race or your ethnicity. It supersedes all that. So when
Exactly. And so the working class gay person, the working class trans person, that person is fundamentally different from Caitlyn Jenner or, someone of their sexual identity. They are working class. So the other thing about the configuration of trans rights is it should be part of universal health care. But, through all the studies that I've looked at, it's 0.075% of the population. These are longitudinal studies been done for years, have gender dysphoria. So this is what I was talking about in terms of allowing us to look at tiny numbers of people, making others follow in these niche politics when 75% of Americans don't have college educations and are not part of the professional managerial class. How can we guarantee a good life for them? We're not. We're leaving them behind. We're like saying, you know what? You didn't get into college, so, your shitty life is your own fault. But the thing is that people need to find a kind of solidarity with each other and oppose this stuff. So in the absence of any left organized opposition, like you were giving Cornel West the opportunity to be that third party spokesperson, in the absence of that kind of third party, I'm speaking for the working class, I care about them, figurehead, they're going to either not vote or they're going to vote for the clown because he's the disruptor of the system. And they're going to be like, you know what? He's actually out of control and funny. And all these other jokers are, speaking from a script that I don't recognize. I mean, he's a criminal. He's a criminal, but the law's working against me. And I actually think I see all of this hand wringing on the liberal side going, oh my God, how can they vote for him? He's a criminal. It's like, if the whole system feels like it's working against you, you're going to be like, you know what, the criminal, maybe he's a person like me.
Yeah. By the way, they're all criminals. Every president in my lifetime is a war criminal. Okay, they're all criminals. You're going to tell me that? I've had a friend say to me, "But Jimmy, Trump actually broke laws, and that's why Dick Cheney and George Bush still walk the earth free men. They lied us into a genocidal war that killed 1 million people. They ordered a torture program to cover it up, and then Barack Obama is constitutionally compelled to prosecute them, and he didn't. And he said because all those crimes happened in the past, and he's not looking at the past torture crimes. He's looking towards the future. That was the public reason he gave. The real reason that Barack Obama didn't prosecute George Bush and Dick Cheney is because he works for the exact same people that Dick Cheney and George Bush worked for, which is the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, oil companies, and Big Pharma. And the reason I know that is because Barack Obama's entire cabinet came from a single email from Citigroup. Everybody that was in that email that Citigroup wanted in his cabinet ended up in his cabinet. And you know how I know that? Julian Assange revealed that through WikiLeaks, which is why the Republicans and Democrats alike have been trying to kill Julian Assange ever since he revealed the game. And that's what's going on. And that's the part that that's what Cornel West didn't want to come to terms with on my show. Let me also show you. This is from your book. Rather than focusing on economic malfeasance, an ascendant professional managerial class elite under Obama pursued sexual crimes. So this is what Barack Obama, instead of going after the economic crimes that had just crashed our economy, which was started by Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, let's remember, he destroyed welfare while he exploded the prison population, gave us 100,000 more cops. He consolidated the media from 50 giant media companies down to 6, and he deregulated Wall Street, which would come over to screw the working class within a decade. That's what the liberal lefty Bill Clinton did. That's why this idea that the Democrats are left is garbage. They're not left. The Democrats are a right wing or a conservative party that serves the elite moneyed interests. So you say rather than focusing on economic malfeasance, an ascendant professional managerial class elite under Obama pursued sexual crimes, not at work or in the workplace, but on college campuses. This is what you were talking about with Title IX. With the zeal that liberals reserve for any policy that diverts attention away from economic redistribution. In short, rather than break up the banks or reform the financial sector after he took office, Barack Obama wanted to use his electoral victory to eliminate sexual violence on college campuses. He wrote a letter to campuses called, it was a Dear Something letter.
It was called a Dear Colleague letter that came out of his Title IX officers.
I remember that.
Yeah, so you go, let me just go on to quote you again. You say the Obama administration's zealous enforcement of Title IX is very different from the way in which Hank Paulson and Timothy Geithner engineered the bailout of criminal financial institutions after the financial meltdown in 2008. Why did an Obama administration send a Dear Colleague letter to the investment bankers and financial advisors warning them about helping their clients evade billions of dollars in taxes that used correctly could be reinvested in public universities and public education programs? What about a Dear Colleague letter addressing to Big Pharma, warning it about federal regulations coming down the pipeline about opioid dumping in rural areas? What about a Dear Colleague letter addressed to Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, AIG, JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, or any other institution that insures, sold, and packaged bagged mortgages to the detriment of borrowers and investment? What about a Dear Colleague letter to the fossil fuel companies, warning them about their cover-up, about their knowledge of carbon production and climate change? In the absence of such letters, we have to conclude that the professional managerial class elites prefer fomenting moral panics to implementing even the most modest redistributive or progressive economic policies, even after a global financial catastrophe. In the absence of such letters, we have to conclude that the professional managerial class elites prefer fomenting moral panics to implementing even the most modest redistributive, or I just said it twice, but it's so good I had to say it twice. So let me bring you back in and that. So that's been what I've been screaming about at this show since we started this show, is that they focus on these kind of virtue signaling, identity politics, talking about sexual violence on campus and all this shit, and instead of focusing on the thing that would actually help everybody, which is an economic war against the establishment. Go ahead.
So one of the things that made that Dear Colleague letter so effective was that it went out to every college that was receiving federal funding, which means like from the National Science Foundation, from the National Institute of Health, the science and medicine departments would be cut off if the Obama administration found that people were not implementing Title IX. So I've been in universities my whole life. I've seen a lot of sexism. I've received hate mail. I've been stalked. There is a lot of sexism and misogyny in the academy. Also, as an undergraduate, you're out here, you're vulnerable, you're a young woman. Yes, universities should be protecting women more, or actually just putting into place like controls about certain kinds of behavior that are unacceptable. But Obama's Dear Colleague letter to the campuses was basically a threat. It's like, if you're not enforcing Title IX, you are going to lose your college funding. So what it led to was this like really intense prosecution and focus about sexual violence on campuses. And there was a documentary by Kirby Dick called The Hunting Ground. It made college campuses sound like, they were just like terrifying places for young women. Well, you know what? What's a terrifying place for a young woman? Like working in a really horrible job and having a really, really horrible boss. And when you're on a college campus, you might be fucked up in many, many ways. You're young, you're vulnerable, but you're actually not working a horrible job where your livelihood is at stake. I don't want to minimize what women have gone through on campuses. I understand, and I've been through a lot of this stuff, but the thing about having these offices then spend a lot of energy and time doing these kinds of investigations that often, I talk about it in the book, led to wrongful prosecution and a general kind of terror on the part of men and women, because basically if you have a Title IX complaint and you don't feel like you're enforcing it properly, the federal government, the Obama administration was going to be like, you know what? You're going to lose your funding. And so my son was about to go into college around that same time. And I'd seen a lot of these cases come through where some things were, prosecuted correctly, but there were many cases where young women accused young men of doing stuff that then destroyed the young men's lives, destroyed the young women's lives as well. And I said to my son at the time, when he was graduating from high school, I was like, do do not be alone with a girl who's drunk. Do not be alone with a girl who's drunk, because you don't know what's going to happen. And there is among young women a practice of, this expectation then put on this in this way that it's infantilizing. It's like it's saying that young women can't protect themselves.
Yes.
It's actually not empowering. And if I were a mother, I would say to my daughter too, like, learn how to protect yourself. Don't be drunk with someone who you don't know, right? But it's this whole thing about like, and this is where I sound somewhat libertarian American too. It's like actually understanding what your power is, what's happening, being aware of what's going on, because right now the atmosphere has gone to under Obama has gotten to a point where sex is seen as extraordinarily dangerous on college campuses.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Because there's always this question of an ambiguity around consent. And then we're like turning our head going, oh, young people aren't getting married. No one's having sex. Everyone's just watching porn. Well, it's this kind of overregulation of sexual life, under-regulation of economic life.
That's right.
That is like this weird paradox that we're living in right now. Like basically you know what's happening right now? The big hedge funds and private equity are buying up office space in malls and putting in urgent care. Our health system's collapsing, but private equity is learning how to profit from it, because they have these urgent care offices where they will take your insurance or they'll take Medicare because doctors' offices and hospitals are overwhelmed, they've been cut. So it's totally unregulated. These like weird, you'll see them. They have these like little Red Cross signs everywhere. They're in malls. Suddenly they're popping up everywhere. Let them do whatever they want, right? With private equity. But with young people on college campuses, let's like really surveil them and discipline them and make them believe that sex is a really, really scary thing. So and make this kind of make it legalistic, make it highly surveilled, and make that the banner under which we're going to go get social progress.
Okay.
In the meantime, people are the greatest causes of bankruptcy in America, as we know, are medical bills.
That's right.
In the meantime, there are 63,000 people sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles. I don't know what the numbers are in San Francisco, but let's not build any social housing. Let's just police people on the level of sex and their language.
Okay.
So I'm like, how is this leading us to a better world? How is this making us feel like we're participating in something that we can be proud of in terms of a future for the United States? How does it actually let the bad guys go? Like basically, and how does it make us, how is there no justice for people who have raped and pillaged us economically?
Go ahead, Kurt.
I don't know, that whole thing. I was so disappointed with Obama because I was kind of a believer. I was like, oh my God, look how Bush has led us into this economic disaster. There's going to be justice. Like people are going to be called to the table. Nobody was called to the table. Nobody served time. There's this little there's this documentary that talks about this little Chinese bank in Chinatown, New York, that they fudged mortgage applications for Chinese immigrants, right? They were the only people indicted for financial malfeasance after 2008.
That's true. That's true. I remember I saw that documentary. Kurt, you want to say?
Yeah. So back when that Title IX thing, I remember when that happened because that was right. So Mattress Girl was the big one.
So
she ended up being a Republican, friend of Robbie Swove now. She went back on that. But during that time when they were hyping this up, and just now I started reading all that John Taylor Gatto stuff about how our educational system is set up. And it's set up to create this PMC class, or as I guess the Chinese call it, Baizu or something, the leftist kind of like managerial. So they're being trained. Yeah, they're being trained to control the lower class. I mean, this is by design. It was written by the people who invented our education system for compulsory education, and they wanted people that were. If you're poor, they want you obedient and a worker, and they want you relatively uniform for marketing purposes. They want to extend childhood. This is something way back then they put in. They want to extend childhood. So there's the thing of I'm helpless that they're putting on the campuses. Then when Obama sucked up to this, because he was like a Neil deGrasse Tyson popular with your white liberal feminist types.
Yes.
And so those kangaroo courts they set up in the college, not only do they make the college not responsible for all the stuff happening on their, all the drinking on campus that leads to this, they get to have not legal, but just a kangaroo court that's basically like what Julian Assange would be in, where you're not allowed to defend yourself, and then they throw them out of college. That's the only punishment. I guess they're kicked out of the managerial class is the punishment.
Yeah.
And that was a big gimme. So now the reason this stuff is getting so crazy is because it's creating the markets of tomorrow. So such as the trans identity. Those are pharmaceutical markets of tomorrow. These are people that are going to need drugs for years and years. So we're training you now for the products that you're going to be buying and manufacturing tomorrow. And that's what they mean by information management. But all this is a real capitalist place. None of it is leftist really at all.
No. You talked about the mattress girl. I think her name was Sulkowitz.
Emma Sulkowitz.
So you write about her, and so they had a kind of a trial for that guy. He was exonerated.
An investigation. No, it was never a trial. It was an investigation.
And they exonerated him, and she didn't like that.
After they kicked him out.
So she decided to wear a mattress around her back, and very performative. And here's what you say about it: Sulkowitz's sense of entitlement, her confident disregard for due process, the centerpiece of liberalism's rule of law,
not feminism,
her indifference to privacy of her alleged attacker and her own became realized in her performance as art. Like all endurance-based performance art, the senseless expenditure of physical effort is a display of the elite's absolute freedom from the necessity of physical labor. From this point of view, Sulkowitz's performance of mattress carrying makes a mockery of the physicality of manual labor. Most workers in the world still labor with their bodies and have to endure physical pain and hardship during a day's work. To choose physical endurance is the ultimate sign of the professional managerial class sovereignty. It should go without saying that Sulkowitz first and foremost objectified her own trauma. The performance allowed her a degree of disassociation, but it also gave her the platform upon which to make a bid for visibility, notoriety, fame, and celebrity. She became a one-woman placard publicizing a traumatic experience to make public something she had to endure in private. Sulkowitz, as an artist and a child of the professional managerial class elites, her parents are successful business psychologists in Manhattan. She was responding to, commenting on, and reproducing the regime of post-industrial work, a kind of work that entails the constant production of publicity, garnering activity in the name of self-branding. In the pursuit of justice, Sulkowitz became famous for her ability to turn private pain into public spectacle. People trained in this regime of symbolic manipulation love to weaponize outrage to fuel moral panics, but they are unable and unwilling to face their identity as a class. In the liberal professions, they police each other to enforce the sort of social and intellectual conformity required by their class, one that is fundamentally fragmented by competition and individualism. All professional managerial class approved policies about inequality, racism, and bias circle back to strengthening their sense of political agency and cultural and moral superiority. In a viciously competitive market environment, they have abandoned once cherished professional standards of research while fetishizing transgression, or better yet, the performance of transgression.
She made a porn too, by the way. She went on to make a porn.
She went on to make a porn, that woman?
Yes. That's when I was like,
but it was also part of her art. It was a reenactment of her alleged sexual victimization.
Yeah, that's
and now she's not an artist anymore. But the really amazing thing is, like, a lot of allegedly feminist women in the art world, like Marina Abramović, said she was like the next great thing.
Yeah,
Maria Abramović said she was the next great. You're kidding. That's wow.
Yeah. But you know what? Sulkowitz couldn't keep it up. Like, to her credit, she did not parlay this into a big art career. But I think it's really damaging for everyone involved, because she, turned her life inside out. And, there were signals that she was going to be rewarded for this. Like, I'm an old school person. Like, I actually believe in privacy. And the the dignity of private life. And it was just like in that period of time it was just like, let me tell you about everything that happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and I've been traumatized. I'm writing a book on trauma right now, and I feel like this kind of self-branding, as I say, is part of this vicious competition for resources and attention, even among PMC elites, because there's no guarantee of good, fulfilling, dignified jobs anymore.
Yeah.
And so there are people who are just like, I'm going to throw dignity out the window, and I'm going to get the most attention possible, because celebrity and notoriety on social media are highly profitable, monetizable. I think it's a tragedy for her, and it's a tragedy for Columbia University, but it's a tragedy for feminism too, that it's come to this. And I am never going to forget that this is what Obama era liberalism produced. And I want to hold all of us to higher standards than the PMC elites want to hold us. And I feel like it's really sad about how real women's issues got totally ignored in the Me Too movement. Like working class women's issues were just not even considered. And there are basic bread and butter issues that, like Biden, to his credit, tried to put into place with the child tax credit. Because this is desperately what women need when they're working. Families need help with children, with childcare, and this is something that the government can do to activate that. The child tax credit has now expired.
Yeah.
But when it was in place, it reduced the rate of child poverty during COVID. Child poverty in America is now going up again. But why aren't feminists like on this? Because PMC women have fewer children. They like to think it's cool to be anti-family, and they're kind of like part of this new left. Just want to distance themselves from trad life. Although now it's like come around horseshoe style. But unfortunately, we still reproduce in the organic biological way. Women have children. Women need certain things when they have children. And you have a whole cadre of feminists in the Democratic Party that can't really focus on these issues. And you can't just go and rely on the family anymore. We need better infrastructural supports for people in America who want to have families, who want to have children. And you know what is really what keeps me up at night is the fact that there are some crazy statistics that said that 3 out of 5 children in America have known hunger. It's the richest country in the world. How did this happen?
It happened.
Letting this happen.
It happened because Bill Clinton, the people who are supposed to represent workers, who are supposed to represent those women and feminism and children who are hungry and poverty, they don't. They virtue signal and do the exact opposite. So Bill Clinton adopts the right-wing rhetoric, and then when he demolishes welfare, what he does is he puts in a work requirement for mothers that they have to work. And what he doesn't also put in is childcare so that they can actually go get a job. Right. So they don't have any childcare, so they now can't get their welfare to help with their children because they don't have any they have nowhere to do with their kids when they're supposed to go get this goddamn job. Here's a perfect example of what we're talking about. The people who are supposed to be helping you and they're wrapping themselves in all this virtuistic language, the DEI language, right? So just so you know, a nice illustration of this is that the CEO of UNICEF,
okay.
Guess who the CEO of UNICEF is married to?
Who?
The chairman of BlackRock.
No.
Yes.
Larry Fink?
I don't know what his name is. I just know that the chairman of BlackRock.
Not Blackstone or okay.
UNICEF, the CEO of UNICEF, married to the chairman of BlackRock. So that kind of that wraps it all up in a nutshell, doesn't it? That's the perfect example of what you're talking about here is these virtue hoarders. Larry Fink. Yeah. Okay. Who's his wife? Look up who his wife is. And if she is the CEO of UNICEF.
I'm sure they made her wife because she's really good at fundraising, and Larry Fink probably gave UNICEF a lot of money, and rich people love to go to galas and wear ball gowns and raise a lot of money, and UNICEF has a lot of prestige. What's her name?
Lori Fink.
Oh, she took his name?
She took his name, Lori Fink.
That was easy. So it just feels like you're like a crazy person when you make these connections. They'll call you a conspiracy theorist, but it's all out there. It's like, it's not the fucking X-Files. You know, you don't need to go to Ohio to look at genetically engineered bees or something. It's all out there. No one is giving there's no systematic way. There's no politician that's making these connections and sort of making a political organization, as you wanted Cornel West to do, to say, you know, here's what's happening, and here's what should not be happening. You know, here's charity being taken over by one of the wealthiest men in the world, and they're supposed to be rescuing children, and it's just a proliferation of inequality and childhood suffering, so that I can look good by giving my wife this position so that she can give money to it. And it's actually not rocket science, but why is it so hard for people to wrap their heads around? Well, what's this famous critical
because they're bombarded by propaganda. And they think when they turn on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, when they pick up the New York Times and the Washington Post, they don't realize that those are propaganda rags that are funded and written by people who are funded by the billionaire class. They don't realize that they're actually reading is propaganda, and they're not reading news, which is why they all think that another country is responsible for what happened. Russia is responsible for Donald Trump becoming president, instead of the exact managerial class and the exact establishment that made people so desperate to vote for him. So they're easily propagandized. Right now, they think that the people who protested the election on 2020, who showed up on January 6th, they think they're all crazy criminals who want to steal their democracy, instead of what they actually are just people who are pissed off at the same system that the other half of the country has been pissed off for the first 4 years. So that right now, people really think that those like Cornel West came on my show, another example of his idiocy.
You like them more than you say.
And so when I pointed out to him, he said that what made Donald Trump a fascist and what made Joe Biden not a fascist, he said that Donald Trump tried to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th. Well, yeah, if he used the military to do that, that would be true, but he didn't. And those were just pissed off protesters, and there were a bunch of Second Amendment gun nuts who showed up to overthrow the government, and son of a bitch, they forgot their guns. They weren't there to overthrow the government. They were there to protest an election, and they got pushed into the Capitol by the FBI plants because this was all set up. That's why there weren't cops there. That's why the National Guard wasn't there. That's why the cops gave them tours. Now that we're saying, that's what this was all about. This was about criminalizing a political movement that actually was going to go against the establishment and stand up against them, just like they criminalized the truckers in Canada. You remember they called them Nazis, they called them violent, and then just a few months later, the whole parliament in Canada is literally saluting a literal Nazi over the Ukraine war. And so let me just correct the BlackRock UNICEF thing. Catherine Russell is the UNICEF woman, and Thomas Donilon is the chairman of BlackRock. Fink is the CEO. So
nice.
Okay,
nice.
So that's how, and I just want to remind people, this is what you say in your book: we must be heretics, we should blaspheme. And that's what I've been doing at this show ever since 2015 when we started it. And that's what's gotten me hit pieces in New York Magazine and Newsweek. That's what's gotten people make videos about me on the regular. People with MSNBC contracts make at least a video about me a week because they get their money from this exact establishment that I'm pushing back against. And that's what your book is talking about. That's what Thomas Frank talked about. Once you realize that you've been betrayed by the quote unquote left, which is the Democrats and the Republicans, because they serve the exact same billionaire class. People read the Washington Post and they think they're getting the truth about Donald Trump. The Washington Posters are owned by the richest guy in the world. Do you think you're getting the truth about anything from the guy who bought a newspaper? He bought that newspaper because he wanted to give you the truth, or because he needed to propagandize hypnotize people into not burning down his house when he stole all your money and he took away your job rights and he took away your union. He's fighting unions. He's not helping you get unions. You got to stand up against these people. So that's the problem in America, is that people have been propagandized and they don't know they're propagandized. Americans are the most propagandized people in the entire world. You know, in the old Soviet Union, when people would read Pravda, when they would get the news from from the government, they know it was garbage. They knew they didn't have to trust it. In China, they know they're being propagandized. In America, they think Rachel Maddow's telling them the truth because she's a lesbian, and gay people are virtuous by their nature, and they would never lie or do the bidding of the military-industrial complex. It's the exact opposite. They hire people like Chris Hayes. They hire people like Rachel Maddow so they can trick you into thinking that they're telling you the truth. A nerd wouldn't lie to you. A gay person wouldn't lie to you. Well, that's exactly where they get hired, so that you wouldn't think they were lying to you, and that's exactly what's happening. And that's why people don't know whether to shit or wind their watch now. They don't know what to do. And then a guy like Cornel West comes along and he repeats the same goddamn language as the people that they're trying to fight against, and he tells you that your enemy is your neighbor. Your enemy is the white supremacists who vote for Donald Trump. Your enemy is not Donald Trump voters. Your enemy is the people who made people desperate enough to vote for Donald Trump in the first place.
Those people who watch CNN and MSNBC, they are part of the PMC. They're propagandized. Most people and young people, because I have they are completely apolitical. They're not watching the news. They're just not informed. They're demobilized. So it's about like demobilizing the great majority of people who see everything as not working for their interests. It's the most propagandized people, and this is what I write about in the book too, are actually the professional managerial classes. Yeah. They're the most deluded class.
Like
and it's like when I knocked on doors for Bernie in like a working class neighborhood in California, it was both like, it was really upsetting. I'm not a good door knocker, but I remember one woman said to me, you know what? Nobody cares about us. It doesn't matter if we vote. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, if she's actually speaking, like, I'm there, like, little PMCs are like, hey, it's the primaries, blah, blah, blah. This was in 2016, not 2020, right? Although I walked for him in 2020, too. And then I walked away from there, and I was, like, kind of angry at her, like, kind of upset. Like, if Bernie had won, her situation would be much better. But I was like, wow, you know what? That is her truth. She feels completely abandoned by politics itself, right? And I thought, someone like Bernie could like pierce that veil somehow. We needed someone like that to actually speak to people who feel like they've completely been abandoned. But Jimmy, the great majority of Americans don't watch the news. They don't read the news. They feel just totally left behind.
You are correct by that, and that's why this show is popular, because people feel, even if they disagree with my political remedies for their problems, they appreciate that I'm not lying to them, I'm not bullshitting them, and that I'm not demonizing them and pretending that my neighbor is the problem, that another worker is the problem. Workers aren't the problem. Blue-collar people aren't the problem. The people who voted for Donald Trump are not your enemy. They're the people who are feeling the same pain from the same garbage economic system that Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan ushered in and Barack Obama propped up and Joe Biden is ramming down our throats. They're also victims, and that nobody knows which way to turn. And so every 4 years they go from Republican to Democrat, Democrat to Republican, because there's nobody out there speaking for them. And that's why it was so, I had such high hopes for RFK Jr. because he kind of had, he felt that we needed freedom of speech. He saw the economic class taking over and screwing people. Unfortunately, his Middle East policy is so screwed up that he can't attract enough voters to win. We're working on that, and we're trying to get him to wake up to that. But I have to, Catherine, I have to run because we have another guest coming on. And so I just want to say, do you have any closing words you'd like to say?
No, thank you for having me on. I think we had a great conversation. Thanks for giving me the space to talk about these things, Jimmy.
I don't know why you hate women and feminists, but I appreciate you coming on.
Why are you a white supremacist?
Why are you a white supremacist? It's so crazy. Catherine Liu, everybody check out her book. There it is, Virtue Hoarders. The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class. Everybody should pick that up. In fact, we should do a book club about it. I think we might do that.
It's fantastic.
That's a great point about atomizing people from each other. That's what the managerial class, they're getting subjected to that. Like animals and proles are free. Like 1984, all my buddies don't know anything about politics whatsoever.
Yeah.
And everybody else believes Rachel Maddow.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're like trying to lecture people in the working class, like, hey, you should really read New York Times. I don't even know what to say. People are like, you know what? No one cares about me. I'm like, yeah, that's true. That's why I'm the worst door knocker in the world. So, Jimmy, if you ever run for anything, have me do something else, but
yeah, I'm not. I'm also not a good door knocker.
I wasn't either. I had to quit doing that.
Yeah,
I would be like, hey, I can see your point.
Yeah. Okay, Catherine Liu, thank you for coming on. We're going to have you back on many times, I'm sure. Thanks for making time for us.
So much.
And thanks for writing the book.
Bye-bye.
We're doing live comedy shows in Oxnard, California, Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Michigan, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and Boston. Plus, we're going to put a date in Edmonton, Canada, plus Vancouver. See ya. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.